talk to me about your Facebook call, Andrew.
Well, the narrative of 2018 just became that Facebook is evil. And that's really compressed the multiple of Facebook and obviously reflected in the stock price, despite the fact that usage is still high amongst Facebook, and the growth is still there at around 23% for next year. So that being said, when I see evil and I see Facebook being priced cheaper than Altria, Philip Morris, you start wondering where Wall Street might have the narrative wrong.
Well, but part of the issue is going to be regulatory. And I spoke to Dan Ives of Wedbush yesterday, talked about the regulatory overhang in tech, particularly when it comes to Facebook. Here's what he had to say. Well, I'll tell you what he had to say. He basically said, look, you're facing regulatory risk for the FANG names, in particular Facebook. It's basically like pouring gasoline on the fire. How do you handle that?
I mean, regulatory is just part of it growing up. It's not going to impair its core. People use the product. They have their amount of their active users is just beyond. There is no second place. It's just growing. It's just a grow process. Of course, there's going to be some regulation and some privacy concerns, but they also so much runway in front of them with available ad space to spend, with Instagram shopping that I stay focused on. So I think that there's a lot more opportunity in Facebook that's not being priced in. It's all about changing that narrative to growing up. It's been a terrible year, one scandal after the next, but by no means would you say at its heart is this an inherently evil company and deserves to be trading at a multiple like this. It's trading cheaper for the S&P than it's ever traded since it's been trading, at a discount to the S&P.
Well, I haven't heard analysts who are negative on Facebook talking about it being evil. They're just talking about the fact that there's margin pressure. Needham, one of them, slashing their price target, saying that there's global scrutiny that's growing for the company. Their continued margin pressure in the U.S. tied to data protection efforts, growing global scrutiny, which may drive additional litigation costs and or regulatory oversight. That's a real fundamental thing. That's a bottom line kind of thing.
Well, if you want to go bottom line, you could also look at the CapEx spending of Facebook. How they said that I think they brought a tremendous amount of CapEx forward to this year, which could bring earnings surprises in future years. I think they spent half their CapEx for the past 6 years in the past year alone on data center business, and that alone could be front-loading for better earnings in future years. I don't think earnings or monetization has ever been the problem with Facebook. Mm-hmm. This has been a perception problem this year. The New York Times article just 2 weeks ago, I think, sent the stock down 8% on them sharing information with Netflix and Spotify. I mean, this has just been a complete perception. But I think their ability to monetize has never been in question. And it's still there, and there's a lot of levers they can pull to expand margins.
What do you think it's going to take, though, for investors to put that story front and center versus, say, stories like the New York Times versus, say, ongoing investigations in D.C.?
It's just going to take time. Big companies have big problems sometimes, right? We just saw talcum powder, asbestos. We can go through Chipotle, E. coli. They had to work through big problems. It comes to big companies. It happens. So this was Facebook's year. I think Google had bad times. I mean, Apple had controversies at some times. This has been the year of the Facebook controversy. But that's when you look at the business, you look at the growth, you look at the multiple, and you say, okay, this is where I'm going to buy it. And that's where it finally became so compellingly cheap compared to everything else in the S&P 500 compared to its growth. And anyone who has kids will tell you Instagram is far from dead.